morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate you taking out time in your busy schedules. Thank you, Karthik. Thank you, Natarajan. And thank you, Abhilash, for joining early in the morning. We discussed about the fact that we will have a consolidated conversation about the emerging strong in the new normal. I wanted to pick it up slightly differently. We know we have this conversation all the time that what is life going to be post the era of COVID, with the perspectives of how the family offices that we work very closely with, I'm just curious to understand and take your perspective on how you see businesses, how impactful some changes that have been experimented over the last 2 years have really made us impact and making the world a smaller place. So what does being strong in the new times mean to you guys would be something that I would like to deliberate with the purpose of really looking at identifying reasons to succeed, not only from a business standpoint, but also from individual who the world today offers with a small set of value that we can all utilize to growing. Earlier, we would always have regional approaches about growth. It would be India, it would be Middle East, it would be Japan, it would be Southeast Asia. But today, with all of us in different parts of the world, are able to bring across the best in us to contribute, and how do we use these new ways of building businesses, building available talent to ourselves so that we can be stronger. So I'm going to start with Natarajan. Natarajan, you've been a part of building businesses, bottom of the pyramid, from a sales distribution ecosystem. How today are you recognizing the changes that you may have not done over the last decade, but have been experienced in doing that over the last 2 years, building a new business? What makes you stronger?
Pranav, yes, there's been a lot of disruption, as we are all aware, over the last 2 years. And from a distribution perspective, there is a lot of physicality. Yes, it's a hybrid world. There is e-commerce shaping up, etc. But the traditional form of distribution continues and will continue to be a mainstay in a place like India. Having said that, I think with all that is happening around, I think it starts off with the self, and I would place the individual in terms of the mindset, in terms of the mental strength. That is very, very important because there is so much of unknown. We don't know what's going to be next. Okay, and however much one plans for, there is some change, there is some disruption. So one needs to be agile, and I talk about the mental strength that really comes into place. And as leaders, one needs to walk the talk. And obviously, with the impact that has happened in the recent past across stakeholders, across teams, directly, indirectly, I think there's a lot of that emotional quotient that needs to get dialed up, and that situational leadership that we keep talking about. At least I've read about it. I think it's really been having to practice it day in and day out. I think that just is very, very important. And in terms of from a company perspective, whether it's a product, it's an innovation, etc., there's been a lot of changes that have undergone. A classic example is if it's a new product, for example, planning. Typically, it used to happen with all the stakeholders sitting in a room. I mean, that luxury is no longer available. So you're doing it virtually. Many a times you do not get a feel of the product or whatever in a virtual platform. So one needs to get comfortable with so many aspects, and I would start off with that mental strength.
Abhilash, I want to pick your brains on that. Natarajan spoke significantly on agility. I want you to have a perspective on the new age ability, which is making us stronger. You're doing some fabulous work to build on the ability and bringing talent to a 101 level so that we can balance the opportunities that were potentially only at regional perspectives. Today, you have abilities and aspects across the world. How do you see ability making stronger and really having a horizontal growth in today's world with globe becoming a smaller place? Abhilash?
Thanks, Pranav, and it was wonderful listening to Natarajan's views here. And thank you for the opportunity, Pranav. I think when you talk about agility and ability, what exponential change we have seen in last 18, 20 months, especially from our perspective of education and learning and development, I think there are significant observations for us, and we work across academic and professional learning both for enterprises. I think the exponential adoption of technology is the equalizer today. And that has cut across segments. You'll be surprised to know, even in the higher education and the academic institution network, the way the faculty have adopted, agility and ability both to come to creating a virtual classroom. Even the rudimentary tools that were available last year, of course, the world is much evolved. We have better tools for teaching, but even the simple adoption of a streaming service like a Zoom or a WebEx to teach classes, I think a huge round of applause for the faculty, the academicians, the teachers who've taken every step to ensure that students meet their education and learning and development outcomes. Another shout out to the learning and development professionals in the enterprise ecosystem, how they have all come together remotely, even the HR systems, interviewing candidates remotely, recruiting them, onboarding them, and making the process so seamless. Even within our own organizations, we met colleagues after 6 months of their joining during the pandemic. I think that goes a long way to show that the ability was always there. It was just the situation that probably sped it up. So again, then the need for upskilling, I think where the job scenario has changed, people moving from their main cities to hometowns, some of the challenges in the job environment in specific sectors. I think the ability for individuals to cross-skill themselves and upskill themselves is becoming more important than ever now. But rather than a challenge, I think it's a huge opportunity for talent mobility, for intellectual capital mobility, and it opens new areas for doing business, both at professional individual level and company organization level. Third, I think is the adoption of informal learning. People always, worked for degrees and professional university learning. Now with the faculty available, subject matter experts anywhere in the world, you can plug into the wisdom of professional subject matter expert academicians, which are bound by travel time and geographies. Today you can access them. So the access to informal learning added to your professional formal learning, I think these are some of the new trends that we are seeing, and they're going to be exponentially increased as the world goes forward when you talk about the ability added to the agility factor as Natarajan mentioned.
So Abhilash, I'm going to come back to you on this and really pick Karthik's mind on that. Karthik, you've been consistently incubating businesses from idea and moving it to a point of acceptance, or as they say, proof of concept, and then commercializing, mentoring young ideas in some ways or the others, in some cases, mature ideas. How do you see building agility and ability when you are identifying an organization to build value for future, as we know that you have consistently spending a lot of time on sustainability and ideas that make an impact to life? I don't even want to call it society, but I think construct that way. So what has been your perspective on empowering yourself and others, using that word, but helping others succeed via prematurely understanding what can be done and so on and so forth? So what has been your success mantra in identification of young ideas?
Sure. I think the last about 18 months have been really interesting, both from, obviously we're just coming out of COVID, hopefully, but also kind of from just the events around climate change, the wildfires, the floods, the events that now showcase what a climate disaster could look like, right? So, I think on both those levels, I think there is a sense, I think, around governments, around the largest institutions, to think a little more strongly about resilience, right, and about capabilities. The way Abhilash talked about, or the way Natarajan talked about, right? Like ability, capability to do things, right? Like, hey, I can't depend just on like somebody's going to manufacture this and ship it to me. I need a ventilator. I need masks. Like, I need to be able to do that locally if required. So agility capabilities around like having a full set of capabilities in any economy that you're in, independent of how much of capital you have, talent is going to become important, right? And a lot of that, I think, towards what Natarajan was talking about, is also thinking about, there is a certain level of going local that needs to happen. So, all that you do in terms of innovation capabilities, if you can't get to the last mile, it's basically that access is missing. Right? And I think the piece that we have learned, which I want to add as an investor, who used to kind of fly around everywhere, trying to like kind of build relationships. The thing that COVID has really helped is the emotional intelligence as leaders, managers, in terms of thinking about employees, right? Like if you had an employee you just saw every day, but you never kind of spend the time connecting, it doesn't work out, right? Like you need to kind of now understand ideas around mental wellness, around like employee engagement, without being able to just conveniently just see them around a water cooler, right? The same thing in terms of customers. You can't most probably reach customers all the time, but you have kind of now learned how to connect again with customers, care about the customers, and hopefully, along with customers and employees, we start thinking about the planet as well. And so, with ability and agility, a certain level of resilience over just pure efficiency, I think, is what the evolution, I hope, is going to be out for.
Yeah. Abhilash, I'm going to pick that up from Karthik, and he spoke about agility, he spoke about ability, he spoke about capability and informal ecosystems. You being the closest to all of us working with the government, and I use the word state-led commercialization, it often comes with first the state recognizing what the proposal is all about. How difficult it is to build on the ideas which a state, and that I can see it very closely when I work with the state-led ecosystems in the Middle East or Japan or Southeast Asia, Malaysia. The fundamental play is always about advocacy. How do you use advocacy as a trend to make an impact? Because what the customer today or the market today is becoming more and more verbose about what they need. But how do you really make a difference in the way the earlier ecosystem worked and today what is needed post the transition?
That's a fantastic question, Pranav. And currently, we work with the states' education boards. We work with the Central Board of Secondary Education. We work with education regulators. And if that the new education policy is any indication of the forward-looking thinking that the government has to recognize the efforts where the education system should be, and the states, the central government, especially on skilling, upskilling, employability, bringing in new age thinking, bringing in softer parts of learning added to the curriculums that we have. I think they have far larger strategic long-term ramifications in building up the intellectual capital of the country, and we must truly appreciate it. In my mind, in all my interactions with government colleagues, they have been very forthcoming. In fact, there is huge interest to learn from what is happening in the industry and trying to bring in policy and support to support those new trends. The private sector always takes the lead in innovation, in forward thinking. And I think the best part with the government that we have worked with us all these years is the government's openness in looking at exploring those ideas and innovation and saying, how can we support you in terms of speeding it up? I think it's a fantastic ecosystem for us as professionals, as investors, as educationists or business or even learners and people seeking employability. I think there could not be having a better time than this to really take on the opportunity going forward. Of course, pandemic had its own unfortunate effects also. But I think the way the governments have worked in last so many years, trying to put in a long-term strategic thinking behind how the future of work, the future of citizens should look like, I think this new education policy is a huge support to what we all have been talking about. So I totally understand what you're saying. It is, I think, the advocacy from the government side. I think the government is leading the effort, and it is up to us in private sector and all other environments to actually support the forward thinking of the government.
Karthik, I'm going to link in this piece to you as well. You work very closely with Niti Aayog, making transformational perspectives across, but you're also advocating things which may not be the ideal uh, line of go-to, which is around long-term impact, legacy, sustainability. Education is far more integral to existence. When you are advocating sustainability, a better life, if I may use that word, what have been your both successes and challenges to make an impact? Because you've been doing this for a while, and what do you really tell is your mantra to keep at it?
Sure. Look, I think climate change and clean tech innovations is the skills of tomorrow, right? Like, in 2000, if you weren't thinking about software and building on a technology strategy or a technology arm to your company, and every business is a software business is how it goes. It's the same thing today when it comes to climate, right? So climate and climate thinking is really good business today, and to us, and to at least to the benefit of Niti Aayog, they are also thinking long term, right? So a lot of the work that the organization Natal Innovation Mission does with us and with the overall ecosystem is around training all the way from your third grade students with tinkering labs, right? So you they're thinking far in terms of like they need more women participation. They need people thinking about innovation and tinkering and like building things today in the third grade, so that 20 years from now we'll have the people who are going to be building the AI and the drone tech and the other things that might be required in a very different future, right? And I think that's the same thing that Abhilash is thinking about, and I think all of it will end up converging where none of these is about just the reporting or the numbers.
Yeah.
It's about the future, right? So it always kind of looks a little off in terms of you're thinking 20 years ahead and trying to build a vision of what the future looks like. And I would say that where we are today, I wouldn't have guessed 20 years ago, right?
So, Karthik, I just want to have one question. I'm going to follow that up in Natarajan. What was one company you invested into which you weren't sure financially, but you said that this is critical to the mission of what you are trying to drive? Can you tell me something about that?
Sure. I think so we're a science and technology focused fund, right? So we mostly invest in people building IP innovation, and there's one company that's exception and a bit contrarian to what we do, and it's a company in the biogas space, right? So our view on that was you basically had to get the engineers out of the room, right? So this was a purely distribution marketing play, making sure that you're supplying day in and day out to customers, working with corporates to get the waste out, no engineers required, just executors, right? And that was the bet we took, and it's really working out now. And it's taken a long time for them to build up that credibility, build up that capability and relationships. But today they're working with the Mahindras, the Tatas, the Shells, almost all the big players in the ecosystem, coming to them to kind of solve for this one critical supply chain problem that needs to be solved, right? And so, yes, very tricky when we were investing.
Yeah. So, Natarajan, I want to pick that up. How advocacy from Abhilash is what he's consistently driving. Karthik says advocacy is important, but he also takes decisions which are led to market access. But again, not a natural way of looking at it. you are a business industry partner, live your life there. Uh, what has been your areas where he said that some of these things are changing, we need to make an impact and really scale the way the traditional distributions have operated? So what has been your experience in doing that and making it more profitable around it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's picking on what Abhilash and Karthik talked about. I think fundamentally, the erstwhile mantra of building successful businesses was scale, efficiency, and speed, largely put. I think the speed gets replaced by velocity, number one. Number two, critically, I think the business model, one needs, I mean, it's a cliched statement that you question the status quo, but the business model per se
Yeah.
needs to be challenged by us. And that is easier said than done, because what has got us here, even if you are a successful business and doing well, will not get you there. And I think that just is very, very important. And the reason why I say it's difficult is when you've done this for a long period of time, that becomes part of your muscle memory. So you
Yeah.
need to take it out and really do that. And one of the best ways that I believe one can do it is really in terms of co-opting not just your team members, but extended stakeholders in terms of looking at options, in terms of brainstorming. I think that just is important, and that's where one of the individual leadership competency comes into play, which is displaying vulnerability. You need not know all the answers. Yeah, I think you're good at it, but you can co-opt the solution, and it's that which will propel us, and that's the piece that I keep talking about: velocity versus speed.
Yeah. Okay. Abhilash, I'm going to, for the sake of the conversation, what word or what moment comes to your mind when you say that this is becoming stronger, keeping in mind what changes we have seen, something which we did not expect, but with that we became stronger. What comes to your mind first when you think about that?
I think in addition to agility, ability, and capability, I think the biggest factor that has come as a revelation to all of us is mutual trust.
Yeah.
I think last 18 months within the organization, outside with stakeholders, with customers, and for us who are our learners are our first customers, our faculty and experts are our first customers. And I think the entire effort to bring everybody together on a common platform of trust, I think there could not have been a opportunity like this anytime in the civilization to accept the fact and recognize that this is the most important part of any business transaction, any journey in life, that you have established trust with your fellow colleagues and stakeholders.
Yeah.
I think that for me is a new normal. As an organization, a lot of new things have happened, both for us and external stakeholders. But I think the underlying statement for all of us is we re-establish the trust to work as colleagues, fellow workers, and part of the same ecosystem for the same mission. And probably last 18 months have been the biggest example of how human trust can establish.
No,
And the industry has grown, the stock markets have grown. There's a clear sign of growth. I think this is what I would recognize as the important factor.
No, in fact, just to add to that, I was reading somewhere one of the top Fortune 500 CEOs who runs a bank. He was very clear that banks were running across the system. He says, if you are expecting me in tough times to say you work from home, and now that times are getting better, and if you work from home, I trust you. But now that things are getting better, I don't trust you. Come to office. That's not going to happen. So the pivot of trust has really been questioned. The ability to fructify objectives have become clearer, and you can work in flip flops even if you are doing a research. You don't necessarily need to build that. Natrajan, what's been one moment for you which has really consisted of really toppling or the pyramid in some ways and saying that this event has made everybody in your business stronger?
I think it's just about recognizing the consumer, he or she, in terms of the mind state, in terms of what's changing, how relevant is your offering, your product, depending on what it is, in terms of how does that take shape in the consumer's life. I think that has undergone a change. And the second aspect that I would say is, whether it's working with your distribution partners or your customers, and that borders on what Abhilash talked about in terms of trust. But yeah, the core principle has been that of mutuality. Have we really displayed that? And I've seen that in terms of the way the relationship has got strengthened during those difficult times. It's like, possibly it would have taken us 5 years, by doing the same thing that we used to do earlier. So I think these are the couple of changes that have happened, and recognizing that and being true to it and playing to that, I think that's been the wow factor.
Karthik?
Yeah, I started with emotional intelligence. So back to where I started. So, I think, which is why I think a lot of it, I think from a human perspective, right? So one is our ability to kind of disregard things that we think is not going to happen to us. And, oddly enough, humans have the ability to kind of assume that they are not as much as at risk as everybody else, right? Like, hey, there's a tornado coming, but obviously it's not going to hit my house. Everybody else might need to hunker down, but I'm most probably safe. And that percentage is about 50% of the actual risk, right? So we are in a state where I think the level of sense of risk perception has really improved, right? So we as individuals, we as corporates, we as institutions need to really kind of take that thought process around risk and kind of build organizations that are more resilient. And resiliency mostly comes from trust, right? And building that trust comes from that emotional quotient of connecting one-on-one at all times, right? So, and the great example is like, I had a boss at a fund called Acumen, and she would like peer in my eyes and like, you feel like practically naked when she was like, trying to talk to you, right? So I think that level of like intensity where, people aren't like looking at your phones and looking at something else or, but spending time one-on-one with people is what's going to kind of build, right? Whether you're sitting across from me in the office or, we are like this over a Zoom call, the question is, am I paying attention to what Abhilash is saying, what Narayan is saying, what you're saying? And, your questions are like spot on, right? Like what we are trying to get to is a higher level of being, not from just an individual perspective, but a corporate perspective.
Lovely. I'm going to summarize this conversation. In fact, emerging strong in a new normal, and I didn't want to go through the traditional ecosystems of conversation. I'm picking up 3 words of this. I think agility, informality, and mutuality with a denominator of trust. I think that is what builds the sense of trust, value, and being strong. And thank you so much for taking out time, and really appreciate all of you. Karthik, we see the beautiful rain behind you. And I'm feeling the mutuality at this point of time as well. Thank you, guys. Really, really kind of you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So much. Wonderful.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.